Okay. We can go to the show now. Awesome. Okay, we're going to get started. My name is Sophia, and this is Mary, and we work at Wild Hope Farm. We are finishing our second season there, and based on our job descriptions, we're the ones who do a lot of the record keeping at the farm, and we have some tips and tricks we wanted to share, mostly for managing a large 400-person CSA and also for organic certification. And we are mostly using a software called Airtable that we will also get into today. A little more about Wild Hope. We are passionate about bringing high quality vegetables to people's doors. We are USDA certified organic. We're growing on 12 acres with about a half acre of cut flowers, 300 laying hens. We get up to about 10 to 15 employees in peak season. We have an apprenticeship program where we house people on site, and then we do farm events. We dabble in the agritourism. Our CSA is our largest revenue stream, and we have about 400 members in spring summer, which is a 14-week CSA, and then 350. What are we at right now?
320, 330
for our fall CSA, and that runs until the week of Thanksgiving.
Mm-hmm.
We have pickups 5 times a week in multiple locations. I guess it's important to mention we're in Chester, South Carolina, which is about 40 minutes south of Charlotte, and all of our CSA members live in Charlotte. And we offer flour, egg, bread, add-ons, and we also offer 2 different box sizes. We go to 2 farmers markets, the Uptown Farmers Market and the Matthews Farmers Market, and they also double as CSA pickup locations, which is awesome. And for surplus produce and melons and
a couple of plantings.
Winter squash, mm-hmm. We build some wholesale into our planting plan, but a lot of it has been surplus produce, and that goes to a few food distributors: Grow Food, Fresh List, Catawba, Happy Dirt, and then some Charlotte people.
Mm-hmm.
So why record keeping is why we're here today, and we're going to break that down into our planting plan, our field tracking, our CSA yield tracking, which Mary handles all of, and we'll wrap it up. Some of the positives of record keeping are for our organic certification. And we also track germination and crop yield through record keeping. You can track pest and disease monitoring. We can incorporate our customer feedback and strengthen our CSA program through a survey that all of our CSA members participate in. And then just general organization through our whole year. We build our record keeping infrastructure in the winter, and then we are inputting it. We try to do as little maintenance on that as possible during the year, and then sort of consolidate and analyze data at the end of the year. And it's also really amazing for onboarding new employees. It's really great for that.
Mm-hmm.
Some negatives are record keeping is time consuming. For the tech adverse, you should have seen us try to set up this presentation. It's not easy.
No.
And then there is a little bit of over recording of information that can happen, and we are always trying to balance too much, too little.
Yeah, not wanting to have too much information and then not use it for anything, as a lot of time, gets sucked into that. So we're going to move on to part 2, and this is a little bit more of the how-tos of record keeping that we've kind of learned over the past few years of being at Wild Hope. I want to talk first. I mean, we're at the end of the season, so a lot of people are thinking about, making a planting plan for next year. And I think one thing I would say is that in order to keep really good records, you need to have a really detailed planting plan that covers the whole year. There's not really a lot of time in peak, planting, harvesting season to do this type of planning. And I think if you don't have a really clear, detailed plan that has places to record, all of the things you're doing on the farm that you want to keep track of, if you don't have a place to put that information, I feel like when you get busy, maybe, people are just not inclined to do it. And so we keep lots of different types of records, but I thought I would mention some of the things that I think are must-haves in your planting plan. Having your seed dates, you want to make sure when you need to be seeding, whether it's direct sowing in the field or planting into cells and flats. You want to know when those transplants that you're seeding into flats need to go in the field so that space is available and ready. You need to have a plan for, when you think you're going to be able to harvest it, because you have all of these different markets that you're trying to serve. And so you want to make sure you have an idea of when those things are coming out of the field. And then you want to know how much to plant, whether that's how much space it's going to take up in the field, so the amount of bed feet you're going to use, and the number of plants you need to fill those bed feet. I sort of think that question, this amount of bed feet you need to plant, is probably the hardest thing to really plan for, because you really need to know your markets. You want to make your plans so that your plantings are not, if you're doing 3 or 4 plantings of cucumbers in a season, you don't want them to be too close together, too far apart, or too early or too late. And you definitely don't want them to be too much or too little. And so that's something that I think takes several seasons to sort of figure out. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how we've done that when we talk about yield analysis. But I think those are all the must-haves in your planting plan. And then, like I said, you're using your production goals to make that plan. And I think we really advocate for having a digital plan. It's not always super convenient for taking your initial notes, but we think that all of our records, being, on the computer, it's easy to share with your coworkers. It's easy to look back 6 months ago and see, what you did. I think it's really hard to remember those kinds of details sometimes. And then it's just, I think we have Airtable. We use the app, so it's really easy to go into it in the field, and I can look and see oh, Sophia planted 80 feet of radishes. She actually planted that, or maybe she didn't have enough space and she only did 70 feet. And now I know I can check that at any time. So that's a little bit about creating a plan. And I just pulled up, I filtered it out so that this is Airtable here. And you can see, I just pulled up, 6 successions of cucumbers. These are actually from this year. And so when you look at this, we always have this is estimated. We did that at the beginning of the year. And then you have the actuals, which we fill in as we're going throughout the season, so that we can compare what we wanted to do with what actually happened. And then that way, anything that happens, whether it's did we have enough for market or the CSA, we have explanations for why something was early or late, or maybe it was right on target. And so I'm going to show, this is going to show that basically if you keep looking to the right at the transplant date, I'm going to go over, you can see the transplant date, the actual transplant date, and then you can see, we plant them in one row, we plant them 12 inches apart, and then we have the estimated bed feet, and then right next to that, the actual bed feet, which you can see is not the same. So I think that's part of we want to know, okay, this is the space we actually had when we got out to the field for whatever reason. And that'll affect, our yield slightly, or affect what our expected yields would have been. And so that's really helpful. And then the last thing I would say is we take lots and lots of narrative notes, and having those linked to planting so that we can go back and be oh yeah, we ran out of seed. That's what happened, why we planted this other variety. Or the transplants were really leggy. Maybe they were in the, maybe we needed to plant them earlier. All those kinds of things. I think you can write them in a notebook, but if you can't tie that back later to exactly what you were talking about, then I think it's really hard to make that information useful to you, in the coming seasons. The last thing I want to say, I think a little bit about planning, is that we've run into this problem of sometimes having how much we want to grow, but not necessarily knowing where we're going to put it. And I would just encourage, especially if you're on a small farm, to have, you should know exactly where you're going to plant each of your plantings and when. And then we like to have things grouped together by family just to help, simplify our crop rotation. So we feel like that's really important. And we've tried a couple of different ways to sort of digitize this. But last year we just used an Excel spreadsheet and sort of this shows beds, and then it shows how long they're going to be in, like each of those successions is going to be in any given bed. So on the side, you have C beds 14 through 31. And this is actually really helpful. We executed this almost exactly as you see it in field 3, block 1. And you can see at the bottom, we have each of our blocks planned out. And it's just like, we don't necessarily like mess with this throughout the year, but we can go in and see, here's the plan. Okay, let's make quick changes if we need to. So
I think an important note here is we haven't fully finished finalizing the size of our fields. We're in year 4 of production. So we're working on figuring out, these ends, the ends of beds and beginnings of beds can be tricky spaces to grow in. So we're trying to finalize what space we're actually growing in. And this field map has been really helpful in allowing us to know where we've been planting.
Or we go out and measure it and it's not accurate to what was the year before. And I think that's just, things are just changing all the time. Like we're not really quite at a place where we have permanent bed systems. So when maybe a new bed's made, it's not going to be exactly the same or in exactly the same place. And so, we just are continuing to like refine those systems and certainly admit to being like in the process of figuring that out. And these records are really helpful because we went out and we saw like these beds are shorter, like almost always were shorter than we thought they were. But like, it's good that we know now to like, we need to go measure them again and, do that for next year. So Sophia is going to talk about field tracking a little bit.
So field tracking is more pertinent when it comes to organic certification. You need to know what field activities, applications, spraying, spreading, any of those things that occurred. We want to be able to tie them back to a specific planting. So in Airtable, we do that. It's really helpful also just for staff turnover. We have 2 new field assistants this year, or one of our farm managers is new as well. And it's really helpful for them to just go in and record settings on implements and
concentrations of sprays, anything like that.
So here in Airtable, we filter them by, this is just a screenshot of a very small part of our field tracking. And we try to filter them by like what kind of activity it is, prepping, managing, spraying, amending. And then we like to have it in a geographic location. So it'll have a field tag and it'll have a bed tag usually. And then honestly, like this is our first year doing that. And so we have a lot of narrative notes as well, just where there's information that needs to go somewhere and we don't know where to put it. It goes in this narrative note column. But
it's there and it's dated. And now we sort of know like, okay, these are the things that they want to know. And so that's really helpful for
us to go back and look at that later and such. CSA data.
Yeah, so we're going to talk a little bit about CSA.
Next season, we will be, actually, next month, we will be revamping how we track field activity. That really was, I think, a hard call to make of like, what do we need to be recording and what do we not need to be recording?
And part of that is that we do a lot of record keeping for the farm, but Sophia and I don't keep those records personally, and 2 new people came to the farm. And so now we're figuring out what systems work for them. Like, how do we incorporate paper and pencil into our system so that we can, if that's easy for them, now we can get it easily also transferred to a digital copy. So,
yeah. So Mary is now going to go into our CSA and yield tracking and analysis data.
You're going to talk about
seeding. Oh, no, I'm going to talk about seeding and germination first.
But yes, so we're going to do that.
So I handle propagation at Wild Hope. And so I fill in a lot of the like front half of Airtable, which is our direct seeding dates and also just our transplanting dates. But with direct seeding, my sort of most useful propagation records have been with measuring seed weight, like weight of seed seeded, and comparing that to bed feet or row feet that were seeded. And that has been the biggest help in determining our densities and our optimal densities. We would like to be like every farm, maximizing our space. And then also tracking that just by variety. Different varieties of arugula weigh different amounts. And so each variety that we seed of anything also gets sort of looked at carefully. And we don't just assume that every variety of arugula is going to be seeded with these Jang settings and these spacings. We seed everything with a Jang. We have a push seeder and also a 4-row tractor mounted seeder. And we also at the end of the season, having those seed weights and knowing that, I seeded 70 grams of arugula and that took me 170 bed feet. That's not correct, but it's really useful for us when we're trying to order seed for an entire season in December. And then I also keep notes on each planting, each succession, and what the weather and bed conditions were, both pre-planting and post-planting. And so I'll just have, it's a very basic Excel spreadsheet that just has settings I used, and then the bed was really crusty, or we had 3 inches of rain 2 days after seeding, and that was rather unfortunate. And again, this is just really helpful for us to keep knowledge on all of our buffer plantings and like things that we sort of sneak into our planting plan as safety measures. We seed a stir fry mix of mustards and kales and choys that we have just sort of like on the back burner as an emergency seeding and stuff like that. And so it's just nice to know that all of those things are recorded.
Yeah, I was going to say too, I didn't mention this in the creating a plan, but everything that Sophia seeds, especially like in flats, we always seed, as though we only need 80% of what we're seeding. So that just builds in some extra buffer for some transplants don't, or some seeds don't germinate, some transplants don't make it, or things like that. And I think just always having those little buffers, and then figuring out like using your records to help you determine like how much of a buffer do you need. Like that's something we're always thinking about in terms of
it's
planning.
Almost like we work backwards. Like you determine how much of something you would like, how many times it's going in a box over the fall.
Yeah, exactly.
And then we are sort of tracking backwards to, okay, that's going to equate to this many bed feet. I'm going to need this many plants. And then we're dividing that and sort of accounting for that 80 to 90% transplant survival.
Exactly. Yeah. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our harvest logging. I think we harvest 3 days a week, sometimes more, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and then if we need to, other days. And so I think that's like, as far as like being labor intensive, like keeping harvest records that are directly linked to like a specific planting or succession. A succession just being like, we plant cucumbers 4 times. Each one of those is considered a succession. So we want to have information about how each individual planting performed for us. And that requires like making sure that we're keeping harvest, a harvest log every day that we harvest, and that's, in a form that we can use and then compile to get our yield data, which I'll talk about in a minute. So it's just really helpful to have all those harvest log information, especially for planning for next year, but also even within the season. Like if I know, okay, we've been harvesting carrots, we've been putting things into storage, I can start to plan out like, okay, we have 10 weeks left of the CSA, like how many times do I want to give those carrots? And like having all of that information like sort of readily accessible helps me know how to fit in, my more perishable lettuces and field crops that are not going to go into storage. And I think it's just a lot of nuance when you're trying to deal with so many different crops. And so just being able to like, even in the moment, be like, oh yeah, how much did we harvest like of this thing last week or a couple of days ago? And then being able to determine maybe we need to like call a wholesaler. We're going to have twice as much lettuce as we need. Like that's happened several times. And I think really being able to anticipate those things is like, I think key to making sure that you're not wasting produce. And so I just put a couple of screenshots up here The picture on the left is of the whiteboard in our harvest pack station, and this is from this year, actually from October 10th. What I do is every day before we have a harvest day, I write the list up on the board, and I put how much we want to harvest, where it's coming from, and which succession we're harvesting from. And so our apprentices, or really any summer harvester, anyone who comes in and is working in the wash station, washing radishes, or maybe they're doing cut greens like arugula, and they're the ones weighing it. And so that's what that notes column's for. Like they're washing it, they're putting it on the scale, they're maybe taking the dry erase marker and just writing out how much each crate weighed, and then they're coming up with the total. But they don't necessarily have to know the succession off the top of their head. Like that's already on the board ahead of time, and that way it's really foolproof in terms of like not creating too much confusion, which inevitably there always is some. But so we have that on the whiteboard. It's also helpful because like if you're in the wash station dealing with paper, which is what we end up doing after that, is hard. So we really like that big board that everybody can see and everybody knows what's going on as far as harvest goes. And then at the end of the day, we have a clipboard, and if you look at the right, that's basically the harvest log that hangs next to the whiteboard. And so each day we fill that out with every single harvest event, basically. So the date, it was scallions. We got 170 bunches total. It's going to the CSA. And then that way, I'm not having to go record it in Airtable every week, or every day, but I can do it once a week or even once a month if that's like what's makes more sense. And it's this spreadsheet we use in Airtable, which I'll also show y'all in the demo, is like particularly it's basically lines up exactly with the harvest log. That's like the printout version, so it's really easy to input that data digitally, and then that's what I use to do all of our yield tracking at the end of the year. And so leading into yield tracking, I think this is sort of if all the pieces fall into place and you have all of your harvests and data all linked to its successions, this is how you can start to answer that question, that we were thinking about in the planting plan slide, like how much should we grow? Like how many bed feet, how many plants? And so what we do is we compile all of our harvest events from a unique succession. And then from that, we take an average. So we had 6 cucumber plantings, like, how did they all do on average? How much were we able to harvest like per foot of cucumbers we planted? And then we can use that information to say, okay, we were able to get 1.5 pounds or units or however you want to do it off of per bed foot. And next year I know that in June I want to be able to get this much, in August I want to be able to get this much, and you can adjust your plantings. I mean, we do everything around the CSA. So to sort of simplify it, let's say we want 350 CSAs, like everything is in 350 units. And if it's like maybe you want it for 2 weeks, you just double it. And then if you want to add farmers market in, like that's either built into the buffer, or we might say like, okay, we want 40 more for farmers market. And that's a little bit simplified, but I think it just gives you the idea of like how we're using our yields to like build our plan backwards, like we were talking about before. And I think like we just want to have as much information as possible at the end of the year to make really good decisions about our plans for the following season. This is a lot of numbers, but if you look at the top, this is from actually 2020 because we haven't quite done our end of year stuff yet. But if you look at cucumbers, you can see that there's all 6 successions. 3B was an added succession we sort of last minute decided we wanted to do, and then you can look across and see the seed date, where it was planted, the actual bed feet we planted, the actual row feet we planted, which just means like there was only 1 row in that bed. If there were 4, then the actual row feet would be 4 times that. And then we had what we thought we would yield, like our estimated yield based on years before's yields, and then actual. And so for cucumbers, they tend to be like very prolific. So you can see that like we got anywhere from 100% more than what we thought we would, to 200% more. And then, one planting, if you look at cucumbers too, like that was in a bad spot in the field. Like I remember exactly where those were, and they performed really poorly due to, some flooding and things like that. So, we had the same experience this year. Actually, we planted too many cucumbers. And so what we found was that we didn't necessarily have too many successions of cucumbers, but our successions were too large. And so we actually had them all the times that we wanted them, but each time we just had more. And so that's sort of something I think we're going to adjust for next year. And y'all are welcome to, spend some time with this screenshot and kind of look at dill and garlic and kale, and everything's different. If you're getting bunches of something, it's different. If you're getting pounds of something, it's different. If you're getting heads of broccoli or heads of lettuce, your yields are a little bit more finite. So just something to think about when you're growing so many different crops. And then the last thing I want to talk about is just record keeping in terms of our CSA. Like that's 70 to 80% of our market is going to CSA customers. And so for us, like we keep records of every box that we've made this year, where it went to, what did the full share get, what did the half share get. And we have these goals of having box content has a lot of variety every week, has the right value every week, has a fairly consistent number of items, or at least a range of like numbers of items. Like we use more of like a dollar value system to like value our box, but we also just want to make sure like throughout the season, like did we give something like way too many times? Like, yeah, maybe the box had a lot of variety every week, but we gave like 4 times, 5 times, and people didn't want that. And so that's something that we want to take all of those things into account, which is a lot of things to keep track of. And we keep that in Airtable as well. I can show a quick shot of that in a minute. And then the last thing I would say is like keeping track of survey feedback. We do surveys for our CSA every single time, or every single like season. So spring and fall. And, we want people to like tell us like, well, what was the pickup experience like? What was the timing right? Like the time of day, did they have too much, too little? Did they, and we do that even by item, like, and then also just like overall, like was the share size appropriate? And so I think like we also, I would say, always send the survey out before the CSA is over, because we want people to be answering this survey, when they're in the midst of like week to week picking it up. I think we got some feedback that was like, traffic is really terrible at this time from like a third of the people at one of our spots. So, just knowing like, oh, we can adjust even those things. And that's not even related directly to like harvest record keeping, but those are good things to like have and like be able to refer to. And I'm just going to show one slide about our, this is one of the questions on our survey. We actually go through all the items that we offer, and we let people decide, like, do they feel like they got it too many times, not enough times, or just right? And in general, I think people, a lot of people are fairly flexible and different, or just like they just want veggies and they're like, yeah, just right, sure. And then they'll have an item or two where they're like, oh, like, I wanted, more arugula. Like maybe we only got arugula once or twice, and actually we wanted it 4 times in the 14-week spring season. We had a lot of, this is actually survey data from this past spring. So like our beans did really well. We gave a lot of beans, and we gave maybe too many beets. So, it's not like we're not necessarily going to make huge changes, because I think people just have different preferences. Like overall, you can see that like people thought most of the shares went well, but those are just small tweaks that we can start to make. And then that again directly reflects our planting plan, which, comes from harvest data. Yeah.
We build this survey in Google Survey,
Mhm.
And it is very easy, and we could even share the questions that we ask.
Yeah, super easy to share.
We want it to be user friendly for the customer. We want them to spend as little time.
Yes, and yes, we have them go through all the crops, but beyond that, their questions are like, would you recommend to a friend? What size share did you have? Would you sign up again?
Yeah. That's pretty much it.
So like, we just want to know, what did they like the stuff in the box? And like,
yeah,
that's kind of the idea there. Okay, I'm gonna see if I can get into sharing. I'm going to share Airtable for just a minute. I wanted to show a couple of the cool features since we use Airtable and we're not necessarily, this is a free, we use the free version. So I think that's part of the reason we wanted to share, our methods with folks. So it's catching up, but all right, great. So since we talked about cucumbers, I thought I'd just show some of the cool little things that are just really easy to do in here. This is our harvest log. So what I showed y'all those 2 pictures of, this is the digital version, just has the date, dill, succession 1, green sleeves, if you're looking at this dill column here. And then, on that day, 5/17, we harvested 171 bunches. And so going back to the cucumbers, I can quickly come in here and say, okay, I want to just filter out and just look at cucumbers. So I go to my filter, contains cucumbers, and then I can go to group, and I'm going to group by, grouped by crop because it's just cucumbers, but I'm going to group by succession. And then it's already sorted by date, so that's helpful. And then the cool thing is, I can just very quickly come in and say, oh, our first succession, it has some features similar to how Excel does, but just I think some of the sorting features are cool. So, okay, we got 1865 pounds from succession 1. We got 29, 20, or 30, or 3,000 pounds from succession 2. And then let me show one more thing, group by crop, and see if this works. So one second. If I group by crop first and then group by succession, so just a couple different things, but you can also see by doing that, they're actually in one bigger group now called cucumbers. And I can also just see we're done with cucumbers for the year now. We actually got 13,000 pounds of cucumbers. So that's just if I want to quickly see some of my yield data without, creating a new spreadsheet or anything like that, it just has some of these features for filtering. That's kind of cool.
It's nice to see also the time span within which we harvest. We want our cucumbers 2 to be coming on as cucumbers 1 is.
Yeah, and you can see our first harvest of cucumbers 2, 5/31 was actually only a week or so before cucumbers 1 ended. And you can also see that from this, the high tunnel cucumbers were around much longer than any of our field cucumbers. So there's sort of a plug for high tunnel growing. And so, yeah, and then in here we have all these tabs. I'm not going to necessarily show you anything about them, but like I was saying, we keep CSA data. So actually I go in, this is from the winter, this past winter is actually one of our first weeks, but week 29. And then I can go over and I actually even put in a picture here that you can see of that share. So, just a lot of there's just some cool things that you can plug in here. There's you can see the box value was $33, and the date and all that, how much we put of each item. So just easy. It's also really great to share with, again, new staff, and they can come in and look and kind of get an idea of all the different shares we've had and that kind of thing. And here's a planting plan, and I'll get back out of this in just a sec. But
I feel like people also might be curious as to why Airtable and not Excel. And I think the filtering and grouping features at the top there and sorting, there's just sort of endless possibility for the order within which you put sort of filter and sort.
It's cool too, because if you actually just go and the filtering I think is great, and then the searching features, I mean, it's very similar to Excel, but I would agree with Sophia that I think some of those things are just, I think, make it. And you can also it's really easy if you don't know computer super well to actually link one of these tabs to another, which I won't go into, but if you were curious about that.
Advanced Airtable.
Yeah, and then what do you do in December? You spend some time trying to figure out Airtable and how to make it really user friendly. So I mean, that was the goal for us, is to create, have something that we could share with all of our staff, and it does have a pretty useful app that I think works really well, much better in my opinion than trying to search. I don't even really know how to search in Sheets very well on my phone, and I feel like it's very easy in
the app is, especially for me in the greenhouse, like, I can know immediately how many flats of something I need to go seed. I need 5 flats of lettuce. And, or, Airtable app sort of says 4.8, and, we always just round it up to 5, and I can input that data. And so it's like, why do we have all these extra transplants? I'm not going to leave a half empty flat.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And it's just
one more thing though, is that we do build our planting plan in Excel, and it is then basically imported.
Yeah,
it's just very simple import into Airtable. Airtable is not the most user friendly for our
building,
the simple math that we're doing, row feet to bed feet and stuff like that. So
you can use functions in Airtable. You definitely can. It just for some reason it's hard to just build a really big spreadsheet in there. Something about the adding entries takes a lot of time. But I think once you have a plan in there, it's really easy to add harvest data and all of those types of entries. So I would encourage anyone who's interested in using Airtable to certainly feel free to ask us questions during Q&A. But also, I watched some online videos that helped me a little bit when I was building it for the team this past winter, and then just playing around with it. But we're happy to talk about it more. All right. Yeah, so I guess in summary, we just talked a lot about how we have a really diverse offering of vegetables, which means that we want to make the most of our space. We want to make the most of our plantings. And that really, drives us to keep good records so that we're not wasting space, wasting time, wasting labor, growing too much, growing not enough, and then the list goes on and on. I also would say, which I kind of plugged at the beginning, I think digital records works really well for us. We have even just in our kind of management team, there are 7 of us. So just being able to share all of our information really easily, it makes it super accessible. And then also at the end of the year, we have all of our data so that we can sit down as a crew and go through every planting and talk about, what went well, what didn't. Same with CSA data. And then lastly, just having really good records makes getting the certification or doing the organic certification process way less stressful. And truthfully, I think when people come out to the farm to do the organic inspection, if you have good records, it looks like you know what you're doing because you do know what you're doing. And it's just really important to have that information.
It'll ask you fewer questions.
Yeah. And I think and also, following the right practices is really important. And so I think, having the information to back that up is really important for your growing practices.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. Great. Well, thank you.
That's what we have.
Yeah. Thanks so much. Alrighty. Get out of here.